In the zone.
In the zone. I feel better for listening to that. Well, we're podcasting, Nick. It's been a while. Let me just start off by saying I'm quite excited to be doing this, and I think it's working already, even though you haven't noticed. I think my internet is fixed.
Really?
I think that's what's happened. I think we can actually have normal conversations from now on. I think we can actually pick up on subtleties in conversation. It's not just
not just nod and pretend we heard the other guy and just automatically agree.
Exactly. Just kind of like, it's a whole new genre of whatever it is that we got really good at there for a while. It's just that delay.
We're gonna have to retool our skill. Yeah,
it's all just moving too fast. Like, oh my goodness! Like, whoa! Like you responded immediately. Oh my goodness! I could see like you're actually like, it's gonna be crazy. Anyway, we might as well just live stream now. I reckon we just go back to live stream because it's all legit now. Anyway, all right, cool. So it's our I want to say Patristics Friday, but not really. It's our just our weekly dose of reading through some literature. We're doing Ambrose tonight, so that's gonna be great. And we are just I'll save everyone the pain of the intro, but basically you just go ahead and stop this if you're listening. If you want to read with us, you should be able to access the texts online somewhere. Ambrose, the Duties of Ministers, is basically what we are looking at. So this is a goodie. Ambrose is a big one, and you said it was relevant for you, particularly
Definitely.
in line. Tell us something about it. Something about a scandal in a newspaper.
Well, Ambrose is going to be talking about keeping silent.
Oh, right. Oh, no.
And it's quite funny because, so here's some Two Kingdoms theology quick before we start.
All right.
So we're not trying to create a Christian government, but we're trying to be good Christians.
Were you on that petition thing? Did you sign that petition thing? Oh, my goodness.
Oh, yeah.
Is that what this is about?
Yeah. So anyway, signed the petition thing.
I saw your name on that thing, and I'm like, what are you doing?
So here's my Two Kingdoms theology drive behind that.
All right.
So we're not trying to make a Christian government.
Uh-huh.
We're trying to be responsible Christian citizens. Mm-hmm. The pen is mightier than the sword. So you pick up the pen, you don't pick up the sword. And in your democratic opportunities, you exploit them by urging people towards the law that's on their heart. And so, you petition and you talk about things like liberty of conscience, equality of rights, and that sort of thing.
Oh, my goodness, you're making me nervous. Where is this going? What's going on?
Yeah, so basically national government passed some sort of law, or they started giving some kickback on, religious meetings and how many people should meet. Uh-huh. And so we were all geared up. It was a bit of a gut punch for me. I was like gearing up for my 50 people. They released 10. I'm like, I'm angry. I've got to take this out on someone. And so the reporter starts phoning all the ministers in town. And so I let her have it. And I said, and by the way, I've signed this letter and here's the letter. And so, So, you never know what the newspapers are going to say. Thankfully, it's quite tame. Okay. It's comes across as quite respectful.
Okay.
But you just never know how they're going to set you up. But I remember I phoned her back twice to clarify exactly what I'd said.
Yeah.
So that I wouldn't get misquoted.
Oh, wow. Were you misquoted at all? No.
I think the central aspects of what I would want to say, like if I had to choose between going to a funeral or worshiping God, I would choose to worship God. Mm-hmm. That religion is fundamental to my identity, that this is something that secular government has not featured in their policy making. They've marginalized religious people because they're legislating from a secular point of view. They're not accommodating the religious identity of their people, blah, 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 blah. Mm-hmm. So I had a big spiel about that. None of that got mentioned. I only got quoted with regards to saying that, you can tackle one another at level 2, but you can't go to church. Anyway, so you got to be careful what you say because you never know how people are going to take it. And then today on the way home, I get this phone call from this whack job. Okay. Didn't even catch his name. It's just like, hey, yes, COVID-19's not real. It's a big sham. The testing procedures are a lie. This is the government trying to control everyone. And people are going to get sick because now we're washing our hands and our natural bodies aren't doing the... And I'm like, all right, dude. So I must have attracted that sort of people, those sorts of people.
Right, with your crazy rants on the newspaper. So can we check this out? Is this like online as well?
Oh, it's totally tame, bro. There's nothing heavy about it.
Is it online? Can I link to this in the show notes?
Stuff.co.nz.
Okay, is it in Stuff? Wow.
Yeah.
Right, that's big leagues.
Timaru minister something or other wants
heck?
fair treatment with restaurants. That's like the headline or some stupid thing. Didn't say anything like that.
Okay.
Anyway.
Wow. Yeah, I looked at that whole, when that thing was getting passed around, whether I wanted to sign it or not. It sounds whiny. It just sounds whiny to me. I'm like, dude, we're already off lockdown. I don't even know what everyone's complaining about. It's moving too fast. I want lockdown to slow down a little bit. It's just like, my wife's back at work. My kids are back at school. Like, freaking, we're going to be meeting, in 2 Sundays max. I'm like, just, save that stuff. I agree that we need to do that stuff. But it's like, that's, it's like, you don't want to be whiny, like a whiny citizen. You want to be like all right, thank you. Respectful, appreciative. Good job. Let everyone else whine, We're more robust than that,
I thought it was okay. I was happy to sign it because, it put all the right principles across. I mean, it had all sorts of stuff about the Bill of Rights that I wasn't even aware of. I thought, great, sounds good to me. But I guess for me, it was the whole issue of if you allow 50 people to have a funeral, and you only allow 10 people to go to church. Come on, if you're going to grant people liberties, be consistent. Just do it.
Yeah, but they're not Christians, though. It's like, what do we expect? It's like we don't.
So how do you get secular governments to remember the marginalized religious minority? By speaking up. So speak up. If you don't speak up, then you might get marginalized.
You see, the thing is, I'm like, we're marginalized already. I live in a different headspace. You know what I mean? It's like it's not like you're going to write to Caesar and go, listen, Caesar, could you just hold back on that crazy, stuff that you're doing there and give us a little bit more space in the mainstream? It doesn't work like that. It's all just a daydream. It's a hangover from Christendom. And even the fact that we could even write a letter is great. But like I don't want to turn that into a thing. So, anyways, you can tell I'm coming at
theologizing it now. You've got natural law, and religious liberty is a part of natural law. Mm-hmm. We would fight for the rights of Muslims to worship freely.
Yeah.
So it's squaring up with that principle.
Totally.
At least in my mind, that's where I was coming from.
Yeah. No,
I think there was a lot of people who would have signed it who might have been subscribing to a particular American type of ethos, pro-capitalism, fear of the socialistic government trying to steal your kids. I'm not coming from that angle at all.
Right. Totally. Yeah. And that's true. We got to. I think I just find it easier to sort of have that voice for others, because as soon as you start self-defending on this stuff,
I'm the other, bro. I'm the other.
I'll fight for you, bro. I'll fight for you. You fight for me. We'll be good. All right. So, anyways, on to Ambrose and the duties of ministers. Basically, can be summarized by the word "shut up." Silence. So it's actually quite interesting. I mean, there is a lot to talk about. There's quite a lot as well. What do we know about Ambrose to kick it off?
Bishop of Milan.
Yep.
He was a guy who was serving in. Was he a judge or a politician?
He was a politician. Yeah.
Politician. Yeah, he got ripped out of the political world and forced into the priesthood. And he's like, okay, I better get baptized if you're going to force me to be a priest.
He was already ordained before he was baptized. Yeah. He was made a bishop.
They got him baptized because they were just so frantic to get him into.
And it's interesting that they used to do that because the magistrate would have to kill people. So basically sentence people to death. So they would delay baptism till the end because that was your one-off washing away thing, and you don't want to waste it. So basically, it's that's why he would have delayed baptism, because as a politician. So all of a sudden he has to change gears. That's crazy.
So he was such an effective public speaker. Mm-hmm. I think it was as a result of the public speaking that he did after some catastrophe. They just loved the guy so much they wanted him in the ministry. Probably because it's such a political role at the time. But another interesting fact was he's known as the guy who rebuked the emperor.
Yes, well, I was about to say political time and everything. Yeah,
he's known as the guy who basically cast the mold for all popes for the future to stand up to the emperor and put their fingers in their faces.
Isn't that amazing?
And denied him the table.
Yeah.
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 And the emperor bowed. The emperor repented. The emperor put on this big public humiliation.
Man.
And so that cast the mold for this
it's basically what you
being head of emperors sort of thing.
It's basically what you were going for in that newspaper article.
Totally.
you were hoping that they all just come and bow at your feet, bro. It's a yes to you, mate. You got to let that go, bro.
Publicly.
All right. Anyway, so prolific author, obviously, he's written a lot of good stuff. Well, a lot of it, I mean, the defense of Christology or the divinity of Christ is big with Ambrose. His more like exegetical stuff is super, allegorical. And he was one of those big origin, sort of streams of origin guys, which providentially worked out, as we said the other day. This is why, I mean, Platonists loved him. This is why Augustine thought he had found the right guy to shepherd him. And so, we're thankful for that, that God used that. But yeah, in terms of, it's just, it's one of those annoying sort of like, okay, the text is definitely not saying that or that or that either or that. And he's just doing his own thing. But he did defend, he, along with Athanasius and all of those that we've mentioned before, a orthodox doctrine of Christ's
Nicene Orthodox
divinity. Yeah. Big Stoic fan as well, and I think that probably comes through in what we're going to read. He was one of the
the disciplined life.
Yeah, exactly. Don't talk. Just don't. just keep quiet. There actually are a few places I think it does come through. Anyways, let's get stuck in. So we've got a few paragraphs. We're reading. We just go one. I'll start us off. Chapter 1, or book 1, chapter 2, 5. Paragraph 5. Yeah. All right. Before all else, we should learn to be silent, in order that we may be able to speak, lest my own voice should condemn me before that of another quits me. For it is written, by your words you will be condemned. Matthew 12:37. What need is there to rush into the danger of condemnation by speaking, when you can be safer by keeping silent? I have seen many fall into sin by speaking, but scarcely one by keeping silent. And so it is harder to know how to keep silent than how to speak. I know that most people speak because they do not know how to keep silent. It is seldom that anyone is silent, even when speaking is of no value. He is wise then, who knows how to keep silent. So that's a good little opening refrain. It's kind of, and he will contradict himself at some level. Like he'll say later on, you can sin by keeping silent as well, when you should speak. So I think a lot of it is for, rhetorical effect. And you don't want to take him overly literally. He's just driving the point home, and making a good forceful point. And it's true, you don't see.
I mean, there is one truism in what he said. The person who doesn't know anything speaks a lot. The whole thing of, if you're a good teacher,
you'll just
you can actually get your point across very well, very succinctly, when you know what you're talking about, you can say it in one sentence.
Right.
When you don't know what you're talking about, you just verbal diarrhea. It just keeps flowing.
Yeah, totally.
So you talk yourself into your point.
It's like my life.
It's like what you often see when Mike's podcasting.
It's pretty much it. That's what you see. I make no qualms about it. Yeah, well, I call it external processing.
It's called
what's that?
Oversharing.
We
don't need to see the process.
Well, it's just kind of like, some people process internally, some people process externally. And I think, external processing. Yeah. I mean, external processes are probably, they need to take extra heed to this. I think it is true, because what happens is you can usually, as an external processor, talk yourself into the point, so you'll get there eventually. And so you get away with it because you can get there, and you probably can get there a little quicker than if you stayed silent, even because, it's hard to keep that internal dialogue going. But the problem is, I mean, you could also just say a lot of things on the way that you just really have no intent of keeping out there. So it did get me thinking, and I suppose this is a point that'll come up again, and maybe we should make a little bit more ground before we go into this. But
Yeah.
I'll just sort of put it up as a question up front. In terms of, you could come away from all of this kind of advice and go, all right, my words need to be less, But I think that someone who actually had to apply it that way would be taking all of this incorrectly. There's something else that we need to look for, and I think there are a few reasons for that, and we'll talk about that as we go. But there's a superficial way to handle this stuff, I think, and because we do need words that do need to. When podcasting, teaching, whatever, you've got, even the subject of banter, we should probably handle at some level in light of what he's saying, the propriety of it, if there is a place for it, where is that place, that kind of thing. Because I think that you could have, let's say we just have this ideal world, everyone just is able to apply everything Ambrose is saying. I don't know that it's going to be that much of a nice place, and I don't know that
no humor.
No humor, no. I mean, sometimes we need the fluff. We do. We are simple creatures at the end of the day. And this, where is the sin? Where is the problem, actually? So let's come back to that. All right, cool. So
I just wanted to say one thing in social media.
Yeah. Oh, there's a,
so this is, I'm very comfortable with what he's saying, because I'm like, everyone should just keep quiet most of the time. That's my personal opinion.
Right.
But anyway, let's read and we can...
Well, I mean, look, I think that's a great point in terms of Twitter and stuff. 'Cause, just my little bit of exposure with that. I'm not a big Twitter guy or Facebook, but I think Twitter mostly. It comes through on Twitter. Well, I suppose Facebook as well, where it's just like, I think so much of what he's saying here, it's almost like doesn't even apply to the spoken word as much as it applies to that form. That's where it's all happening. That's where the real problem here is happening. Yeah. So remind me to come back to that, because that's a big point.
Cool. All right. Well, let's. So it looks like yours is slightly shortened than mine, but okay. I'll just tuck in it. So paragraph 6.
Okay.
Paragraph 6. That's what we got.
Yeah.
Therefore, the saints of the Lord loved to keep silence, because they knew that a man's voice is often the utterance of sin, and a man's speech is the beginning of human error. Lastly, the saint of the Lord said, I said, I will take heed to my ways, that I offend not in my tongue. For he knew and had read that it was a mark of divine protection for a man to be hid from the scourge of his own tongue and the witness of his own conscience. We are chastened by the silent reproaches of our thoughts and by the judgment of conscience. We are chastened also by the lash of our own voice, when we say things whereby our soul is mortally injured and our mind is sorely wounded. But who is there that has his heart clean from the impurities of sin and does not offend in his tongue? And so, as he saw there was no one who could keep his mouth free from evil speaking, he laid upon himself the law of innocency by a rule of silence, with a view to avoiding by silence that fault which he could with difficulty escape in speaking.
What's he saying there?
It's all much of the same. It's a long way of saying be silent.
It sounds like you need to get to the point, Ambrose. It sounds like you're externally processing.
Hey, back in that day, they didn't have a lot of paper to waste, so you just sort of,
totally.
All your in-between thoughts get put out there.
For sure. All right, let's just go straight on to the next one.
Next one.
All right, this is, paragraph 7. The law says, Hear, O Israel, the Lord thy God, not speak, but hear. Eve fell because she said to the man what she had not heard from the Lord her God. God's word to you says, hear. If you hear, take heed to your ways, and if you have fallen, quickly amend your way. For how can a young man amend his way except by taking heed to the word of the Lord? So be silent first of all, and pay attention, lest you fail in your tongue. Is that the end? Yeah, that's the end. All right.
Paragraph 8, should we just add that on? It's short.
Jump it in, yeah.
Okay. It is a great evil that a man should be condemned by his own mouth. Truly, if each one shall give account for an idle word, how much more for words of impurity and shame? For words uttered hastily are far worse than idle words. If therefore an account is demanded for an idle word, how much more will punishment be exacted for impious language?
That's good. I like the distinguishing there between idle words and kind of more terrible things, because I think that's kind of hinting at what we were talking about earlier. But just on that previous point, that's a little bit of the allegorical stuff coming through there, or just that approach. You see, it says hear, not speak. So, but I mean, the point is there, and basically we just, the tongue, right? The James tongue thing is really what's driving that, and that's true. We just it's just a reflection of our careless hearts, and we can't keep ourselves under control, so it's just going to come out. But like on that point, is silence really going to be the answer, I suppose, at all of these instances? Sometimes it is, in that obviously if you're going through an obvious, like if you can't rein your spirit in, the be angry, do not sin. I think he mentions that at some point. I mean, there's a great example. Like, you've got to keep silent because otherwise you're going to do something sinful. You're going to say something sinful. I like that because it's nice and lucid. It's not like saying, listen, just don't speak because you're trying to look cool or be random or look wise, or, because it's going to be a folly versus wisdom thing. Don't speak when you're going to sin. So that's a good reason to be silent. Also, don't speak when you can learn. I think that's if you just, you see this come through in the Proverbs all the time. Everyone's just a babbling fool when actually you should just need to just listen to what the other guy says. I think that's a big thing. A time for talking, a time for silence, that works as well. If you got a situation that just does not call for words.
Answer a fool according to his folly. Do not answer a fool according to his folly.
Exactly those sorts of ideas. So, but then we're onto that as well, in that, you've got to answer the fool according to his folly. There are times to speak. So I suppose, again, going back to my initial comment, you got to take this thing in its entirety, I think, in order for it to have the punch that it needs. Because, otherwise you're just it's just going to straitjacket, it's not going to be effective. You know what I mean? I went through a phase like this. I did. I was just like, I'm just not speaking. You know what it ends up being though? Because I'm just disappointed with everything I say. You know what I mean? I don't know if you're the same thing. It's just, I never go to a community group or a church, group or anything and come out going, hey, nailed that. My speech was just like perfect. And so I remember coming into Christianity, you wanting to work this stuff through. You really are terrified at every word that you're uttering. And so you end up just pulling back on everything and just retreating. And just, even if you got something to say, just you're not going to say it well. So why even say it at all? And it comes across like you're unfriendly, all the time. It comes across that you really just don't care about people. It comes across that you're unhelpful. And
you're describing me now.
Yeah, I'm glad you got that. Glad you picked that up. And it's not really doing what should be happening, because you would have thought that everyone would be like, well, that's wise. Look at the way that guy held himself, And when I'm around someone who has something to say that could be helpful or friendly or something, but they've just decided to adopt the quiet is wise model, I get irritated with that person, because I know that it's easier to do that at some level. It's not going to exert. You don't have to think through what you're going to say. It's almost a lazy option at some level, not at all levels, but at some levels. So I'm just wanting to bring some, I don't know, not pushback, but just some extra points.
No, totally. I mean, I don't know if you read the intro to the whole thing, but in the first chapter, he talks about how he had been forced into this position early, and he was having to learn as he taught. And it's almost like he's projecting his own experience of having to keep silent.
Interesting.
And now he's teaching silence because this is a lesson he's learning for himself.
Right.
So here's a talker who's opening up his own little personal situation that he's dealing with, and he's giving advice out of that.
Right. Yeah. That's a great insight. Also, you've got that whole semi-monastic thing going on, right? With Augustine and the discipline of silence. I know when I was reading through this whole thing, Solitude and Silence, and have you ever read Richard Foster's Spiritual Disciplines or whatever it was called?
Hated it.
I know. So like, the whole chapter on this, right? And I think this actually was connected to what I was talking about early on in my Christian walk. I mean, I was deeply affected by that book, and it just advocates the silence of it. And I only realized after a while that there's this whole connection to this monastic vibe, which actually we're not shooting for at all, and
Richard Foster freely borrowed from Buddhism.
Yeah. Well, not to mention, I mean, the transcendental meditation stuff is just ridiculous in that book. Yeah, totally. But even, even just on the Quakery, stuff as well, and just I suppose the spiritualist stuff, and just that. Anyways, I mean, I don't want to turn it into a rant on his book, but it's basically that there is that early kind of monastic vibe lurking in the background that I think you have to watch out for when everyone's going to tell you to keep quiet in this context, So, but it's interesting though, because you have to be able to justify speaking then. And, not always in the most profound way. It's easy to justify speaking when you've got this profound truth that you're going to say succinctly after having thought about it for 3 months. Obviously, you need to say that, Obviously, there's room for that speaking. But what about what we're doing right now? What about what the fun that you have when you're kicking around with your wife, What about the banter you have with friends? I mean, is every one of those words in view with what he's saying here? If so, how so? What are we talking about?
Yeah, it's a guy who's not married. This guy doesn't have kids.
Yeah, and there's no real life at some level. Yeah. And so it reminds me a little bit of the whole the burden. You think about the whole quiet time thing and the what a good thing, right? To wake up, spend some time with your Bible, praying. And so, we've got this quiet time idea. And so we've taken these biblical principles, turned it into its own thing, which is like know the word, read the word, pray without ceasing, meditate on the Lord, all these ideas. And we've turned it into a thing and pushed it so hard in evangelical circles. It's replaced church. It's become like the new form of communion. It's like, mothers are condemned if they don't make room, in their busy lives to do what Susanna Wesley did. And you know what I mean? And it becomes like so far ahead of what it was ever, put down in scripture. And I think you have something similar going on with the silence thing. The scriptural principles are quite clear, don't sin, don't... and
edify.
What's that?
Yeah. Edify. Build
up. Yeah. And so on that edifying stuff, I think that's where the banter stuff falls in, right?
Yeah.
I think there's a legit place for, there's banter goes dark and you got to watch out for it. And banter gets funny and weird and, and I think it is a dangerous place.
And it goes all racist or it gets all prejudicial or it starts tapping into wrong forms of humor.
And it's very difficult to pull banter back. Like, because typically you're off guard at that point. Everyone's relaxed. It's it takes a special kind of friendship to be able to stop that banter in the middle and go, that's too much, I do it all the time with you. You're constantly crossing the line. But you know what I mean?
So thank you for your rebuke. Let the righteous smite me. It is a kindness.
Well, I would pour some oil down your beard, but that's lacky. It's just going to go straight. It's going to be like skin cream for you now, right?
The wounds of a friend.
So, you got to watch it for the banter thing. I've definitely been in a few situations, and we see this all the time. Like, I'm, even sometimes on podcasts, you'll be listening. Banter starts out. I have no problem with the banter. I dig it. It's funny, but then it just goes, whew, that's just too far for me, and it's just such a weird space because it's like you weren't really ready for it, you weren't ready to, you're not like going into listening to a false doctrine where you're sort of ready to pounce or something, it's lulled you into a false sense of security, and then you all of a sudden you have to deal with it. But you have to. I think that God's got to constantly be on. That's the door to the mouth thing. It's got to be there. There's got to be that line.
Just the whole thing with silence and social media. So on the one hand, we need banter, but on the other hand, there's also people are very emotional these days.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of discernment. There's not a lot of logical thought. People aren't taking a statement, analyzing it, checking the background, seeing if it was true. They just accept hearsay.
Yep.
They'll gladly believe a lie about an enemy, even if it's a blatant lie.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this is helpful just to reevaluate some of that stuff.
Absolutely. And he actually does deal with that whole passion thing, which I think is it's like you're just getting taken away with your passions. Words can let you do that, can bring about that whole effect. So, yeah. Well, with that in mind, we've said it enough. We've guarded it enough to be able to read it now and just accept what he's saying. So,
you're next. Chapter 3, paragraph 9.
9, yeah. So what then? Oh, brilliant. This is exactly where we are. What then? Ought we to be dumb? Certainly not. For there is a time to keep silent and a time to speak. if we are to give account for each careless word, let us take care that we do not have to give it also for a careless silence. That's a quotable right there. I like that one.
Yeah.
That's great. Cool. You're gonna hit. That's it for me on.
Okay, mine's much longer, but it's fine. Let's do number 10.
Yeah, we got a lot more to go. So,
all right. Let us then guard our hearts. It's the important point. Let us guard our mouths. Both have been written about. In this place we are bidden to take heed to our mouth. In another place thou art told, keep thy heart with all diligence. If David took heed, wilt thou not take heed? If Isaiah had unclean lips, who said, woe is me, for I am undone, for I am a man and have unclean lips. If a prophet of the Lord had unclean lips, how shall we have them clean?
That's good. Something I thought as well is that this is in the context of ministry. This duties to ministers. So that's probably important to, help as well, because there is and you know how this is always a thing. I mean, like, man, I was reading it. Where was it? Was it, one of the Puritans maybe, or who's that guy? James Jones. Oh, I forgot his name now. He's that guy, the duties to ministers. James Engel.
Charles Bridges? No. Oh, yeah, James Engel Jones. Yeah. I think that's the one.
What was that book that he wrote? Something like so many ministers. I think I'm thinking about that one, but it kind of comes through in all the Puritan literature whenever they're talking to ministers. But I was just stunned at how direct they were about this thing, because we've got the caricature of the Puritan minister who's out there in the corner, like everyone else is having fun, but
the killjoy,
he's the killjoy. But like, Puritans in general were the killjoys in everyone's mind, but the Puritan minister, like, dude, you were like the ultra killjoy.
He was the killjoy killer.
Yeah, exactly. and I'll never forget, I did a wedding once where in a Dutch Reformed sort of town back in South Africa. And so, that was my first wedding. I'm like as young as you can get. I'm not the killjoy minister at that point, by any stretch of imagination. But just because I had the suit on and everything, and it was in that context, I mean, like, I would walk past people and they would stop what they were doing, stand at attention, stop joking around, stand at attention, put out their cigarettes quickly as I was walking past, like dag sê Domini, and just, give you a quick bow and a salute and all sorts of things. And and then you sort of at ease soldier, as you walk through. And but I hated that feeling. It was just horrible. But the whole thing that comes through in the actual literature for the Puritans, I mean, it's frightening. They're like, listen, you should not be in any way joking around with anyone. You need to be the first one who leaves. You need to be the first one who is showing his disapproval. And they'll actually give out lists and rules of like things that these poor ministers had to do to show their constant sobriety on this stuff. And it's just like, I mean, imagine doing ministry under that like yoke. I mean, it's almost impossible to imagine. But anyway, so a slightly less version of it here in that, but he is speaking to ministers, and there is a principle there that is more intense for ministers, because you are just doing more talking. Number one, you're teaching. You have more opportunity to edify. You have more opportunity through your words to do these things. So it really does get accentuated.
Totally. I mean, weren't you petrified when you started recording your sermons?
I was petrified when I started preaching them, but.
Like, preaching's fine. Like, I love my congregation. My congregation knows me. Right. They know my foibles. They know where I'm coming from. They'll take everything in context. And then as soon as you start putting something online, that's it. Forever, everyone can access it, and it's always going to be somewhere out there, and you can be quoted. I remember I was just before I started Romans. I just thought, whew. Yeah. I lifted my game. I changed the whole way I prepared sermons just because I knew, hang on, this is going to be terrible.
I remember someone saying right in the beginning, this probably was a good thing, but I remember someone telling me, listen, you have to preach as though Jesus is in the front row listening to your sermon. And I mean, it's just that it's such a weird thought, like, right? Because Christ is in his church, and, obviously, but just thinking about how Jesus would consider your exegesis as a hearer of your sermon and stuff, he gave you that word, like he's going to know if you're totally, pulling a fast one. And that thought that's enough to blow my mind right there.
Or imagine Jim Renihan in your.
Well, yeah, exactly, and that kind of effect, yeah, definitely. Where you're just being held to account. Essentially, is what we're saying, and that's the principle. Like, ultimately, this accountability is it's like one of the worst things that could ever happen to you, to forget that will be the case for you, right? How does that? I remember Deva struggling with this. He said, I freely confess, it's something like this. I freely confess I have no idea how the gospel works together with a minister's accountability for his words. Isn't that interesting?
Twice as accountable. Yeah. Held to double account, James 3 says.
Yeah. How does that work with the gospel? I don't know. I think maybe it means you're saved by your skin of your teeth. But, it's just
the fire that burns up the hay stubble and straw is twice as hot.
So, why are you laughing right now? Oh my goodness! See, it's just.
I know your fire is going to be very hot.
Whatever. My goodness. The banter has just gone too far. See, I'm just stepping in and saying that. All right. Now, lost my talking, lost my thinking, lost my reading.
13.
13.
No, 10. Right. 13.
13? Really? Okay.
Yeah.
And this is me.
Yeah.
All right. Let there be a door to your mouth, to be shut when need arises. And let it be carefully barred, that no one may rouse your voice to anger, causing you to pay back abuse with abuse. I like that. That's great. That's the one. That's the big core truth there for me. You've heard it read today, be angry and sin not, Ephesians 4:26. So while we may be angry, arising from the motions of our nature, not of our will, that's interesting, right? There's something going on there with a sort of a deeper anthropology that I'm not quite, there'll be something to dig into there for sure. Arising from our motions of our nature, not of our will, let us not utter one evil word with our mouth, lest we fall into sin. But let there be a yoke and a balance to your words, humility and moderation, so that your tongue may be subject to your mind. I like that as well. That's the goal, right? You're not letting your tongue just rant off. And there's even hope for external processes there, I think. Because it's a truism across life, and it's also a Stoic principle. Emotions subject to mind. Yeah, and we like that. That's good.
Yeah.
It's kind of going back to your social media comment. It's intertwined with that. All right, let it be held in check with a tight rein. Let it have its own means of restraint, whereby it can be recalled to moderation. Let it utter words tested by the scales of justice, that there may be a seriousness in our meaning, weight in our speech, and due measure in our words. So, I really like that. So as long as we've got a way to incorporate the banter part of speech, and banter is probably not the right word, but just the everyday real life part of speech with that, lest we become absolute, monsters.
What do you think about just reflecting on some of those old Puritan Reformed pastors' books? Pastors who tell jokes, it's like flies in the ointment.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. That's what I was thinking. Wow. Where did that come from?
It's in every book.
Yeah, right. It just flows through all the literature, right? But
it's
I think
like you're a man who has to do with eternal things, heaven and hell. And every time you walk in a room, everyone should be reminded of heaven and hell. If you tell a joke, it's a fly in the ointment. And,
I think that actually, just because obviously I got into all of that big time, and I read a lot of it, and I'm like, it's all in that Reformed pastor genre, that big weight that settles on you. And I think it did damage. Looking back on it now, thankfully, I wasn't able to sustain that anyway. But
I see you've swung all the way to the opposite extreme.
I don't think I have. I think this is maybe I will give you that I'm not exactly in the middle. But there is a lot more of a way for me to swing, bro. just so everyone's clear on that. But the whole thing, I think it did negatively affect things, just in general, relationships. It did, it put a weird expectation on events and things. And I think one of the things that started to happen to me is I started not liking people. I think that was one of the more serious effects of that whole thing, because I just didn't want to have to be that thing that I could never be anyway, or that maybe I could be successfully for an hour at a time or something, But how can you sustain a public thing like that. And then it's just like, if that's the burden that you must carry every time you're around anyone, it just, I mean, look, fine.
I remember dealing with the sin of small talk. Is it sinful to talk about the weather?
Right.
Oh, I'm not talking about the gospel and Jesus right now. Am I sinning by discussing a BMW versus a Mercedes-Benz with my brother-in-law?
Wow, totally. Yeah. And it's almost like, and that's actually a great point, because that almost comes out of that whole, it's almost like that small talk thing is in the realm of common grace, and like to the degree that you can affirm that there is a almost like a mundane, a common, you can affirm that those things have their place, and it's only when everything is sacred, everything must be redeemed, everything, you're driving at this thing, Puritan style, which is, it's fatigue. Fatigue will set in very quickly. Burnout. How many ministers I think must have burnt out not so long ago when this was still the flavor of the day, even if not Puritan,
Yeah, and what tends to happen is you have this ideal and you never live it. And there's that tension. You're constantly living this hypocritical thing, and that's what burns you out.
Totally. Yeah, exactly right. So, I mean, you got to be able to take the full weight of what he's saying without going into that weird zone, without isolating the minister. I mean, like, you've got to, and putting him on a pedestal. So this is what we always talk about. Just don't, as Puritans, I mean, of
just
all
stop the fan mail.
Yeah.
Stop praising me. I'm just an ordinary guy.
Who's praising you? It's like, no one's sending me fan mail, but I can get the expectations placed on me if I'm not careful. To be someone who would maybe get fan mail one day. Anyway, all right. So
4:14.
Okay, we got like 3 more. If anyone is listening to this and going, how much longer will we go? All right, we've only got a little.
Yours are probably shorter than mine, so maybe you should read.
You
do 14, I'll do 15.
Okay, all right, 14. Here we go. Anyone who takes heed to this will be mild, gentle, and modest. I like it. Good. For to guard one's mouth, restrain one's tongue, and to not speak before examining, pondering, and weighing one's words, whether this should be said or that should be answered, or whether it be suitable as a time for this remark, is certainly to practice modesty, gentle, and patience. I really like that. That's great. So he will not burst out into speech through displeasure or anger, or give sign of any passion in his words, nor proclaim by his language that the flames of lust are burning, or that what he says is motivated by anger. So there's the Stoic thing coming through, but I think it's good. I mean, this is really this is good. Solid. Yeah, let him act thus, for fear that his words, which ought to grace his inner life, should in the end plainly show and prove that his morals are corrupt. So that's it for me. That's the paragraph. But so that last little sentence is where it gets a bit trippy for me. It's kind of playing on what we were saying a bit earlier, in that a lot of the Puritan literature for me has that tone. Just don't let them know who you really are. For heaven's sake, act like this, but don't. If you say too much, they're going to figure it out. They're going to figure out that you are.
Always keep yourself in the shepherd mold, in the shepherd office. Never come down to their level and let them think that you're one of them.
Exactly, because then you won't be a pastor.
Because you'll lose all your authority.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't think he means that, but when he says, let him act thus, this is to reflect your inner life, should in the end it plainly show, your words plainly show and prove that your morals are corrupt. The new covenant is that your morals have changed. Like, your heart is not corrupt. There's a fundamental reality there that needs to come through in who you are truly. And so I don't think anyone should be in any doubt whatsoever that you're a complete monster of a sinner. But they need to see you wrestle with it the way in the exemplary way. That's the thing.
Do you think that maybe those old Puritan books are shaped by society? So you had the Lord and the servant, and because all the Anglican clergy used to come from the upper class,
right? And
so there was that expectation that we are just your regular Joe Bloggs, and you're the Lord Bishop. And so there's this automatic station. But today, our culture values authenticity. And if you actually try and impose those old social norms, you're going to come across as this weird, aloof guy.
Yeah.
It's countercultural.
Yeah, true that. Yeah, and it's a great analysis, and that presents the danger for us. Look how authentic I am, as in like,
over authentic.
But one of the good ways I found to distinguish between what we don't like in that authenticity mold and what we should strive for is maybe well captured by the two words authentic and vulnerable. Right, because you can be or transparent, let's say, and vulnerable. Transparency could be like, you could let people see your heart, but no one really wants to see at the end of the day, because
they want to see your heart, but not your skeletons.
Right, but even your heart. I mean, it's gonna be pretty vile stuff coming through, and that's easy to show people. Like, look at what a wretched sinner I am. I mean, you could just take them through 5 minutes of your day to show them that, right? But the vulnerability aspect. So it's always transparency with vulnerability, in that you're going, yes, this was the 5 minutes of my day I'm taking you through, but I hate it, and I'm trying to not do that, and walk with me in this, and and obviously we're not talking about disqualifying sins and those sorts of things. I mean, that's the thing on its own, but in general, life stuff and the way that we speak and the way that we conduct ourselves. So I think that's super important. I mean, we need to keep that stuff. We need to be able to hear these words to hold up a caliber in ministry. Otherwise, it's just all going to go to custard. This is an important biblical principle, but we have to do it in a way that isn't going to wreak devastation on ministry and cause burnouts and all sorts of things. Yeah.
I guess the distinction would be ministers aren't a different class. They're just more mature believers.
Yeah.
They're just further down the road on the same track. Hopefully,
ideally, yeah. I was about to say, like, I'm pretty much sure I'm not the most mature believer in my congregation, but hey, I'm trying. I'm repenting, bro. I just did.
You were just vulnerable right there. It's very good. You're a living lesson.
You took the epitome of my life and smeared it over my existence. All right, good. Do you want to read
15?
15, yeah.
Yeah. But then especially does the enemy lay his plans when he sees passions engendered in us. When he supplies tinder, then he lays snares. Wherefore the prophet says, not without cause, as we heard read today, surely he hath delivered me from the snare of the hunter and from the hard word. Symmachus said this means the word of provocation. Others, the word that brings disquiet. The snare of the enemy is our speech, but that itself is also just as much an enemy to us. Too often we say something that our foe takes hold of, and whereby he wounds us as though by our own sword. How far better it is to perish by the sword of others than by our own.
Right, that sounds like it's talking directly about you and that newspaper.
Exactly. So some people have swords in their speech and they try to hurt you.
Sounds like an allegorical reading of Ambrose. All right. Enough said. Last paragraph.
The last one's 5:17. So you can take that one.
Right. We must also guard against visible enemies who provoke us, spur us on, exasperate us, and supply material to excite us to licentiousness or lust. If anyone reviles us, irritates us, stirs us up to violence, or tries to make us quarrel, let us keep silence and not be ashamed to become silent. For those who irritate us and do us an injury are committing sin and wish us to become like themselves. Beautiful. It's good. It's a good.
I think it's a really good portion of scripture in light of all of this, especially in terms of being provoked, is Paul in 2 Corinthians. Mm-hmm. It's like he only ever defends himself when the gospel's at stake. Yeah. Otherwise, he accepts slander.
Right.
So it's a great sort of distinction. He's not defending himself, but he has to defend himself when the gospel's getting slandered.
True that. Yeah, that is good. Yeah, and it reminds me a lot of Luther's whole thing as well, where he's just basically, just there's no self-defense at all, nothing. Just if it's about you, just take it,
Yeah, don't be whiny.
Yeah, exactly. Don't be whiny. Yeah, exactly.
They said something bad about me on the internet.
Yeah, or they won't let us go to church one more Sunday. So let's write like a 3 bullet point. Oh boy. All right, there we go. Just crossed the line again. I'm going to end it there. Thanks, Nick. Appreciate it.